And we're away. Hey, welcome to the podcast. I'm Rich Mellon and host of Trapping Inc. TV. Today, I have a very special guest from Alaska, and this is Mike Matney. And Mike is noted for his incredible fur products, and he's noted for special traps that he makes. But mostly, you're noted as being a trapper, and you've been a trapper for a very long time, Mike.
Yep. Yeah, I originally started trapping when I was about 8 or 9 years old. We had where I lived, we had a rock pile that was about 200 yards from the house that the wood rats would get into. And then the wood rats occasionally would get to the house. So my mother hired me to trap the wood rats out in the rock pile. So basically my trapping career started as ADC work, basically.
So wood rats.
That would have been in the middle of the 60s, about 65, 66, somewhere in there.
When you talk about a wood rat, are you talking about a pack rat? Like they
Pack
have
rat.
a hairy tail?
Yep, hairy tail. Yep.
Make a
Pack
big
rat,
mess
wood
and
rat.
stink. And
Yeah, they stink something terrible.
yeah.
They get into the house, they're really, really nasty. So,
Okay, so that was how it started. Was with the pack rats or wood rats.
yep, I was getting paid 50 cents a wood rat. So my mother really wanted the wood rats dead before they got a chance to get into the house. So
Where was this?
this is in northeastern Washington, north of Spokane, Washington, about 80 miles.
Is that far enough to be away from the crazies, or
Yeah, pretty much.
back then it was? Huh?
Oh, yeah, back then it was, basically all the decisions are made by the people that can see the Space Needle in the state of Washington.
Yeah. There's a lot of that goes on. BC, it's if you can see Stanley Park, there's not many decisions that are made outside of that little wart on the bottom of BC there, and it's getting that way everywhere. It seems we're just about a modern day Hunger Games, aren't we?
Yep.
Yeah. So you started with the wood rats, and then you moved into I understand
Beaver.
Yeah.
I started trapping beaver then shortly thereafter. And that was when I was about 14, I guess, something like that. And one of the interesting things that, I was able to trap enough beaver by the time I turned 16. I always wanted to buy a Corvette, but by the time I got 16, I had enough money for a Corvette, but I realized I needed a Ford pickup. And so I went and I couldn't order it myself, but my dad ordered it for me because I was just 16. But I had accumulated enough money from beaver to buy a brand new pickup, which that I don't think is possible these days. But
It's so funny because beaver, of course, has gone up and down in price, and fur has gone up and down in price. Every now and then, though, you have, the last crazy blip we had would have been about 2013, 14, when, and it was driven mostly by the ranch mink and that, but marten was hitting $200 a marten, and the beaver is making a nice comeback. If you do your work and you take your beaver in the wintertime, you're going to get 40, 50, maybe even $60 for the beaver at this last auction. As much of an auction as it was, I mean, they can't get anybody there in person. So, I mean, but the other stuff has risen in price so much more. Like that Ford truck, when you bought it back then, was probably what?
$4,600.
That's what I was going to say, $5,000. And now
so basically it's 10 times. So in theory, a beaver should be worth $300 rather than $30 at this same time as a comparable.
But you know what I think happened? A lot of people have asked me why this happens, and I don't know. Let me run this one by you. I think the ranching did it to us. I think the fact that a mink coat at one time was very very spendy thing, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 for a mink coat. Now the price on that has dropped through the floor because there's so many mink ranchers out there, and I think that drug the wild fur down with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree 100%. And it's going to be interesting to see when they Denmark and all the places where they destroyed all the mink because of the COVID. I'm interested to see what's going to be the outcome of all what just took place.
Well, I think we're seeing the beginning of the outcome. Our muskrats have really gone up. The muskrats are the first things that are affected by the mink, and mostly because female mink, when she gets down to around about $12, well, she's about the same as 3 muskrats. And so that depresses the price of muskrats. And mostly what female mink are used for, and what a lot of muskrats are used for, is for lining the inside of down coats in places like Korea and Vietnam and that kind of thing. It's quite a popular a trend, I guess. I'm not sure that it's necessary for the weather and that, but it's a very popular trend. So once that female mink gets down to $12, well, now it kicks the heck out of our muskrat prices and that. And now the mink have disappeared. All of a sudden, I just had I sent my mink for this last auction. These are all wild mink, and I got like, I think I sent, I forget what I sent, 30 mink or whatever, but a dozen of them, 10 or a dozen of them made top lot. And that was $10.50. but back when they were working with wild mink to make those mink coats, it took a lot of mink, because to be able to match the colors and to match sizes and all that, it took a lot of mink. Now today they just walk up to a barn that has 2,000 mink in it. They're all the same color, same size, same age, same everything. Yeah. It has greatly devalued the value of wild animals. I think we totally became relegated to the role of being just trim, right?
Yeah, pretty much. The wild fur only makes up 5% of the fur trade currently. Where like you said, at earlier years it was significantly different. So, in the 30s or late 20s, pine marten was worth a month's wages, and so at least people would go on a marten track and they would go after that one pine marten, which that was kind of an interesting period of time when silver fox that were a $300 silver fox when a day's wages was $1.50.
Well, it was fascinating. We had kind of that stuff here too. Like if you go to Fort Chip up in the northeast corner of Alberta, it is the one of the largest freshwater deltas in the world, and that is the Peace River comes together and then they head out back to the Arctic Ocean. But it's a large freshwater delta, and so you have all these sloughs and lakes and that hold muskrats. They're all shallow. They get flooded every so many years, or they did until the Bennett Dam was put in. But during from the late 1800s into especially into when the Depression was going on, that was where people went, because every muskrat was worth $1 to $3. And during the Depression, nobody was getting that kind of money for a day's wages. And so It was the largest city in Alberta. And it was all because of muskrat. It was all because of fur trapping. Yeah. Oh, they take hundreds of thousands of muskrats out of there, or they did that at that time, out of that one freshwater delta. And it's an inland delta, which makes it very unique, right? Mm-hmm. Rather than the deltas you have up, like the Mackenzie Delta and that, where it flows into the Arctic Ocean. It was pretty interesting to learn the history that or the influences of history that trapping has had. But your own history, then you started with beaver, and you were making, back then I guess beaver would be $30.
Yeah, $30 average thereabouts, and that continued for a long time. It continued that. Of course, there was that period in the 70s when coyotes went ballistic and went up, and cats took off pretty good then. When I first started trapping cats, they were $20, bobcat that is, and coyotes were about $6 and that. Well, then they jumped up to somewhere around 100 for cats and 50 for coyotes in the early 70s. And then when was the period when they got they got up to about $200 for the coyotes in 76 maybe?
I don't remember that. I remember that 78 to 81, 82 lynx were just like crazy.
Yeah, that's when the bobcats went up, were $400 or $500 at that point in the 80s there.
Yeah.
That might have been when the coyotes got to 200 too. There was a period of time when I could make pretty good money on coyotes, and and that. So I know my son, oh, must have been in the early 90s. He asked me, he said, Dad, I want to, and he'd heard the story about me buying a pickup. He said, Dad, I want to catch as many bobcats as I can so I can buy a pickup. And he was 16.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, I'll help you. So by then this was after, that'd be after 2000, because we were having to use box traps at that time. So I'd figured out a way to trap bobcats using cage traps, and I'd actually figured out that there's a real benefit to cage trapping. You used to lose bobcats occasionally being eaten by a cougar or being eaten by another big male, and it was just a shame to lose a bobcat when he was caught in a foothold or a snare. And so by cage traps, you eliminated that problem. And then, so what I did is I went out and I pre-baited during the week, and then we had a 24-hour trap check after I-713 pants, which banned the use of all body gripping devices. So I'd pre-bait, and I had as many as 600 baits out at one time, and then he'd take off on his snowmobile and check all the baits, and he'd carry a box trap with him, or actually could carry 2 of them with him at the time, and any bait that got hit, because it was all frozen the bait, and the bobcats had hit the bait and they wouldn't leave it. And we usually used a piece of beaver meat about the size of a cantaloupe or so, but all they could do is gnaw on it because it was frozen solid, but they wouldn't leave it either. And so he'd set a trap, and then he'd go back the next day on Sunday, and he was catching, always he'd have 1 or 2, but he had as many as 5 several times, I think, and in a day. And that's when cats were $350, $400. And so, but he ended up catching in a couple months, and went out and bought a Toyota Tundra pickup. So a used one, but nevertheless, he was able to, I don't remember how many, $12,000, $15,000, something like that.
So that's awesome.
So he bought his with the bobcats.
So when you were pre-baiting, what did you do? Take like a frozen chunk and nail it to a tree, or how were you doing that?
Yeah, you have to keep it up off the ground. Otherwise the coyotes will grab it. But once it's up off the ground, the coyotes won't bother it. And then I used a concoction of basically rotted down fish and skunk essence and RV antifreeze, and just squirt a spray of it up the side of a tree. And that'd draw them for quite a ways. But, basically when I was pre-baiting, I would just go until I cut a set of cat tracks, and I'd put in a bait and spray it up the side of the tree and hang a ribbon for him. And then he'd just go to the drainage and head up the drainage with his snowmobile until he found a ribbon and check the bait. If there's cat tracks around it, then he'd set a trap. If there wasn't, he'd just blow on to the next one.
That's fascinating. And what a great system. I've never heard of anybody doing that. I guess mostly because everybody, today at least where we are, we just set a trap and you walk away, right? But you had to use cage traps.
Yeah, we were forced into that. We were forced into a 24-hour check. We were forced into using cage traps. Like I earlier mentioned, I discovered there's some real advantages to using cage traps. So we were able to turn loose the females, which, of course, a milky-bellied female is worth very little compared to a tom in that. And it just made a lot of sense to me to be turning the females loose. Here it is perfectly fine. And if you shake a cat up in a trap, he won't go back in it. And so a good friend of mine, he called me up one day and he said, "Hey, have you been up Mitchell Flats trapping cats?" And I said, "Yeah, why?" "Yeah, I figured you were, because I got all these cats that walk up to the front of the cage and just look at it and then turn around and walk off."
You know what? I refer to lynx as a stoned hippie wandering through the bush all the time, because they just make no sense and they will do the dumbest things. And then you got to prove me wrong. You actually trained a cat to do something?
The majority of them.
Yeah.
The majority of them won't go back in. I know I had one here not too long ago. My stepson was trapping cats, and he was turning the females loose because that's what I'd kind of taught him to do. And he said, "This damn female keeps getting back in the trap." He'd caught it 3 times. He'd shake it up harder the next time, and and it'd still get back in it the next time. But finally, he finally ended up killing it just because he couldn't keep it out of his trap. But that's not generally what happened. Generally, you shake them up once and they won't go back in a trap.
I know a guy who's thinking right now that he wishing that we had a problem with bobcats in Alberta, because he does ADC work, and one of the things they do is they try to drive coyotes away through disruptive behavior and doing things like that. But it is funny that you like, to me, the dumbest animal out there just about is a cat, like a lynx, and everybody has this great respect for Wolverine, that the Wolverine are so intelligent and everything. Yet we have a study going on here with the Alberta Conservation Association, where we live trap Wolverine, and then we collar them, and they get drugged, and we do studies on them, all that. And because of these collars, we can GPS follow them and all that. We've discovered we have way more Wolverine than we ever dreamt we had, and it's actually been a good thing. You usually, as a trapper, you're kind of scared to get into this because it'll turn up being something that removes your rights, and they'll get rid of the ability to trap Wolverine. And I've been told that that's where they were at, and that the study was actually, they thought was going to prove that they should shut down Wolverine trapping in Alberta, and it proved the exact it proved the exact opposite. They proved that the snowpack wasn't as important, and that far more of them lived in the flat boreal forest that we have up north, like where my trap line is, as compared. They thought that the vast majority of Wolverine lived along the eastern slopes of the Rockies, and that's just the smallest part of the population. But these animals, when they put this proposal up, and they were going to do DNA trapping, where they would have these alligator clips there that would pinch fur off of them, so then they could test the DNA, to sample how big the population is and all this kind of stuff. And these guys are all brilliant and in their own way, but I'm sitting there watching this, and I'm thinking, so then they're talking about these big old log traps, where it's a deadfall trap, and it closes the lid. Basically, they're in a big coffin, right? And we went through some learning there, because if a Wolverine can see daylight anywhere, he can eat his way out. So we had to do a lot of redesign there to actually keep them in there. But then I says, it got bothering me so much. I said to him finally, I says, I got one problem here. I said, these animals, have this reputation for being so incredibly smart. How are we ever going to get them back, to get that collar? And well, they said, well, we've thought of that too. So everything is downloaded through GPS and all that. And the only thing that we'd ever want to recatch them for is to weigh them and, check to see if they're pregnant, if they're female, that kind of stuff. Right. I said, okay. Because I said, I don't know how we're ever going to catch them again, and I even the fact of how you were going to put a collar on them, the way they're bullet shaped right from their nose to their shoulders, right? And I'm thinking that's even going to, how do we keep a collar on? Turns out they will go into a cage over and over and over again. We have created welfare Wolverine. They have names. We discovered one there. I forget his name now. I think Goliath. I think it was something like that. Big Wolverine male. We've discovered that males often travel with their sons for a year, and this one guy keeps going back to the log pen, and they go there, and the son is laying outside. We have trail cams all around, all these things. The son is laying outside, and he's on his back, and it's just doing all this kind of stuff, waiting for dad to get out of the pokey, right? Because dad's in jail. And so, of course, he runs off when the bios come up. These things, they all have a trigger on them, so we know that when an animal's in there. And there's lots of food in there too, right? That's what brought him in there. Is there's lots of food. And they go there and they knock him out, they tranquilize him, they check him all out, and they let him go. And he'll be back sometimes two and three times in a year. And he brings the boy with him, and it's like, and I'm thinking, God, these things aren't like what everybody thinks. They're not brilliant. They're just, you have to be a place where there's lots of Wolverine, and then you understand, how easy it is to catch Wolverine, right? But that was, and then now you tell me that you can climatize a cat to not go into a cage. I was like, oh no, the cats are brighter than Wolverines.
Well, I tried that same thing with pine marten, because I thought, well, maybe I should be turning the female pine marten loose with the same concept in mind. up my production for the area. And so what I found is the pine marten are the same way. They will go right back in the trap. He's going to be, you catch him one day, he's going to be there tomorrow too, and he'll be there the next day, so that didn't really work. So my next attempt was to use gang sets and put in a beaver carcass and get them using it, and then set about 10 traps around it, because here in Southeast Alaska, there's a lot of pine marten per square mile in certain locations, and they're per area. So I'd set a half a dozen traps or 8 traps around this bait, and then selected all the males that I wanted to keep, and then turn all the females loose. But that turned out to be way more work than it was worth. And I did it for 2 years, and finally decided it really wasn't gaining as much as what I wanted to accomplish. So I kind of gave up that program.
What was your percentage? Or was there anything you could track?
I didn't really track it as much as I was just more interested in turning the females loose. And if it was a juvenile, like, I was just visually looking at it and seeing, well, it's either got to be a female or a juvenile, and then turn it loose. I figured, well, if it is a male juvenile, then that's going to replace the ones that I did take out of the big males. So anyway, I had tried that, and like I said, I finally gave that up and decided it really wasn't doing me as much good as it did in the case of the cats. It was real noticeable. So,
well, I think the biggest problem is that cages are not cheap. Cages are pretty awkward to move around.
Well, actually, I made a folding trap that lays flat, and it was 24 inches long, and it take up about 2 inches. I could carry about 30 or 40 of them in my box on the back of my snowmobile.
Okay, so not all of us are MacGyver like you. we don't have your abilities.
Well, I had all the stuff from building the muskrat traps.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. Like your muskrat traps. You sent me some of your non-grip muskrat traps, and they're a floating colony trap. And I had some success with it this year. I only got to use it in the spring, which spring is a bad time for muskrat trapping around here for a couple reasons. One, if they're going to die, they die in the winter. And 2, all these lakes, I trap the heck out of them every fall, because it's the old thing. Like when we were kids, the old fellows would sit around and say, oh, that, they'd be whittling and chewing Copenhagen. And they'd say, that lake out back is just plumb full of rats. But I'm not going to go there till springtime, and then they're all going to be big, and they're all going to be prime. Yeah. And then most of them would die off. They would never make the winter. Right. I mean, Mother Nature sets it up so that only 10% of them ever need to make it to be able to procreate, to breed or whatever, and whether it's muskrats or fisher or whatever. And with muskrats, it's probably not even 10% make it.
Yeah. They say you can trap 90% of the muskrats and maintain a healthy population through indefinite. Just by catching 90%, you reduce the numbers down to where you have a healthy population, and repeat the process over and over and over again, and never let it never let it populate up and disease out or die out.
That's just it. Like, I mean, the end for any wild animal is not pretty. There are several, about 4 different things that how they can end up, how they can die. Old age isn't one of them. But when the fur market died in 81, 82, and muskrats died, right? Like, I mean, the price dropped, and so people quit trapping muskrats. Well, within a couple of years, we Toliarima swept through the muskrat population up here in the north, and we never seen a muskrat until the late 90s. Like, I mean, that's how bad it was. Like, I mean, it just wiped everything out, and that was just disease, because that's Mother Nature's way, and people don't understand that, like the various anti-fur people, when they talk about how cruel you are and the choices that that you're making killing those animals. What's your answer when people say, how that you're being cruel? Like,
I have an opportunity in the store to talk to people a lot, and I find it really enjoyable to if they'll enter or interject in a conversation about it, that, we probably have some things we could agree upon. We can probably agree that no animal dies of old age. No wild animal dies of old age. And so, they may give a little bit of slack. Well, you grab your smartphone and you ask your smartphone, what percentage of wild animals die of old age? And they may dispute it, but your answer is basically none, or a non-negligible amount. And so, well, okay, well, so what's the other possibilities of this animal to die? Well, it could die of starvation, it could be consumed by another predator, or it could die of disease, or it could die from a conibear trap.
Yeah.
Out of those 4 deaths, which one is the most humane? Well, I'm thinking starvation, as if you want to, so many times people relate their own thoughts of themselves to an animal, which I don't know if that's truly accurate, but nevertheless, given that, I would prefer not to die of starvation. I would prefer not to die of disease. I would prefer not to be consumed by another predator. I would rather be killed relatively instantly.
Yeah.
So out of the humane deaths of that animal, trapping, in fact, is the most humane. But the more important point to look at is how humane is it to the animals that are left? Because now they no longer have to compete with that. Yep. With that animal. Now their environment is so much better than it was before. So as a steward of the land, I'm doing my part to make the environment better for the wildlife, not worse.
And, like here in Canada, we have by law, our traps are mandated to kill in a certain amount of time. So when you're talking about the conibear or body grip trap, the 110s, 120s, 160s, 220s have to kill within 120 seconds, 2 minutes. When my time comes, I'll take the 220. Thanks.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then the 280s and 330s they have to kill in 300 seconds or 5 minutes. That's still a lot faster than anything else. Like, you watch some of the animals, like muskrats. Sometimes when you catch muskrats, especially in the springtime when they've been breeding and that, they'll have half their innards hanging out. Now that animal's going to die. It's just going to take it days to die. So what's more preferable? Going into a trap and it being over with, or that situation, right? People, I get a lot of these questions, and like I say, I think a lot of people, because so much today is by internet or by email or whatever, and you don't get any inflection, so you're always kind of a little bit gun shy, right? You don't get any inflection about what they're, where they're coming from. But I think a lot of people just want to understand, and there's a lot of people that I've explained it to. Overwhelmingly, like probably 80% of the people that watch our show or our podcasts or anything are not trappers, but they're just fascinated with the life, and they're fascinated with the results that it has had on the economy and on the countries involved, right? It's one of those things is just hardwired into the human psyche is the trapping and hunting and that, right?
Yeah. I get a lot of enjoyment of talking to them when I come in, and I, particularly the Californians. I enjoy Californians immensely, talking to them, because they, as you know, they probably recently banned the use of all fur products and all fur manufacturing, fur products. And yet I see that the same people are going to figure out that, according to most of the stuff I've read and understand, that there's somewhere around 800,000 tons of microfibers being flushed into the ocean, which now most of the sea life has got plastic in it, basically microfibers. And I can see the same people, that have been the ones that are saying, send me money and I'll right this terrible wrong of trapping. I can see them, these are fur koozies I make here are biodegradable, organic, and a renewable resource. Can you say that about the microfibers?
Hold that up.
None of them.
Hold that up. Let's see that. Yeah. There you go. And that's a beer can koozie, and a beer bottle koozie. And those are made from beaver?
Beaver and otter. That is what I make these out of. But,
that's cool.
So anyway, but they're biodegradable, organic, and renewable resource, and so these same people that were the ones that were saying, send me money and I'll right this terrible wrong of fur trapping, could be the ones that are saying, send me money and I'll right this terrible wrong of using polyester and petroleum made fabrics that are now destroying the oceans and the sea life and the ecosystem in the oceans. So
Yeah,
I can see that coming around.
I find that how the people approach you the first time kind of sets a tone, because if they ask a question, then there is a chance that an explanation will make sense. But if they come up and karma's going to get you and the million, 100,000 other things, that awful things they say, including my grandchildren and all that kind of stuff, I know that no amount of facts is ever going to get through to them. They're operating just on emotion and whatever was injected into their cereal that morning, people, just when you think people couldn't disappoint you anymore, then along comes that, right? I know what you talk about when you talk about managing the populations, that how important it is that we keep trapping. It takes a lot of trappers to make a difference on a population. I take a look at my trap line, 144 square miles, and at its lowest point, they say that you need 0.4 mature marten per square kilometer in order to have maintain a breeding population, in order to be self-sustaining. So at the minimum, I have 150 marten running around on that trap line. And I catch 35 to 50 of them every year. That's I'm not taking out that 80 or 90%, but in actual fact, I probably have, when they talk about good populations, like in probably your country, probably I know that in the Yukon and that they're talking about 2.4 marten per square kilometer. Well, at that point now, that the number just absolutely jumps up. And I take a look at how, when did it become so popular to be able to blame a single person out there for all of these problems? The marten population is down, or the coyotes have dropped off, that kind of stuff, when nobody even begins to look at the variables involved in the nature of things to begin with. Like, we went through, probably 10 years ago, we started getting low snow levels in the wintertime, and the marten populations dropped, and the fisher populations rocketed. And I didn't put that together. It wasn't until I was doing research later that all of a sudden, then we started about 6 years ago, we started getting 10 feet of snow, 10 feet of snow, 12 feet of snow, big winters again. And the population of the marten went like this, and the fisher went like this. And so I started researching all this. It turns out that marten do best where there's more than 2 feet of snow a month, and fisher do best where there's less than 2 feet of snow a month. So was that really the variable that was important there? Did my trapping have anything to do with it? What about the oil companies or the lumber companies? All that stuff. But no, that one guy, that trapper, he's at fault, right?
Yeah, I see the same thing here. When I mentioned the 90%, that only pertains to muskrats, where they're breeding in some cases 2 or 3 times a year and things like that, where the pine marten are significantly different, where they're extremely easy to overtrap. Entirely different situation there. And so just making that distinction, that each animal species has a different productivity. And when you're trapping your pine marten, you notice that when you have pressure on the pine marten, they tend to have a little bit better reproduction rate. I know areas that I've gone into and started trapping that hadn't been trapped, the number of marten actually increase from trapping pressure, because I think what it does is, if my understanding is correct, like the farmers that raise hogs, they feed the hell out of the hogs before they breed them, so they have a higher number of fat cells in their system, so they produce a larger number of ova, and they have larger litters. And so I think in the case of all mammals, that's the case, where if they go into breeding season where the numbers have been reduced and they have an abundance of feed, they have more healthy numbers. Same thing with coyotes. Instead of coyotes having 4 pups, when they go into the breeding season and they have an abundance of feed, they may have 6 or 8 pups.
Yeah, we've discovered that. Part of the thing with marten that is really, really odd is a marten is one of the few fur bearers that can freeze to death. They have such a low fat content. Their body is, I mean, you never, I mean, a fat marten has 2 little gobs of fat under its armpits and a little bit at the groin. That's it. That's a fat marten, right? Not, compared to an otter or whatever, that where you get pounds of fat off them. That's why the snow is so important. They have to be able to get under that snow and into that Andean climate in order to survive those cold weathers. Yes, I do find that when I trap hard, I end up having more marten rather than less. We have exclusive trap lines in Alberta. So I have 12 miles by 12 miles, 4 townships is 144 square miles. That's mine. I'm the only person who can trap it. So I can control how many animals of whatever kind are taken off of it. But the fact that you do better when you're trapping them harder has more to do with the fact that the generational age of marten is really, really low. Like a generation is 3 or 4 years. That's it. I never understood that because people are talking about, oh, I haven't been across the river over there in 20 years. I'll bet you the marten are just stacked up over there. Well, you can't stack them up over there because the generation is so short. I was contacted by a biologist out of Michigan, and him and his wife were doing a study, and they had taken and collared or put beacons or whatever it was in little RFD trackers is what it was in marten and they got like young of the year, and they had one that made it to 5 years, and I says, oh, is that unique? Like I didn't really know anything about the aging of marten. He says that's unbelievable. He says very few make it to 4 years. And, for one to make it to 5 was unbelievable. So in a lot of cases, what happens then is that your population might just get old, and your population might, become unbalanced because you don't have those females in the time when they could producing lots of young. And the young are, of course, are the one that's what the most that don't make it through the winter, and 2, that's what brings the diversity as the. If she has a big litter, they're going to spread out more because they need to find their own areas, where if she just has one, it might stay in her area. So there's a lot of advantage to that. And I mean, we know that from, as you mentioned, with coyotes and wolves. We know that from, when they're trying to now control the Alberta wolves that we exported down to Montana.
Gee, thanks, by the way.
You're welcome. I got paid.
Why couldn't you have just said, no, we're not going to give you any of those? Why? That would have saved a lot of problems for us if you just said no.
Do you know how many conversations were over a beer or a bottle saying, you know what? And they paid us for it. Yeah. It was crazy. It was crazy.
I used to trap in the Selkirk range right against I lived right against the Canadian border. I had a lot of friends in Canada, so I'm very familiar with your trapping system. I actually, for a number of years, I tried to develop that in the state of Washington, but it fell on deaf ears and never could get it done. But, I trap in an area where they had the only woodland caribou in the lower 48, and we'd trade them. I don't know what the hell we were trading. Bighorn sheep, I think we were trading them for caribou. So for these woodland caribou, and finally the Canadians said, "You're not getting any more goddamn woodland caribou. They keep dying when they get down there." And then the wolves came in, and I remember talking to the biologist, and I came down off my trap one, the Forest Service biologist. I said, you got some wolves up there right now, and I said, what are you going to do when your precious endangered wolves find your precious endangered caribou? They're not going to eat one of them. They're going to eat all of them. You know that, right? And he said, yeah, and there's nothing I can do. They're both protected, so that's what happened. And so the Canadians then finally said, we're not giving you any more caribou if you're going to just kill them. So,
and now the caribou are in trouble in BC because of wolves.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's just crazy. I don't understand. Like, the bounty system is such an incredible way for controlling animals. Like, I mean, people go out and hunt wolves or trap wolves or whatever, based on a bounty, it works really well. It works really well. The political willpower isn't there for it.
I think the operative word there is bounty. Now, if you look at the expense reimbursement they do in Idaho, that's not a bounty. It's a expense reimbursement for the welfare of the ungulate population. And so, there's $1,000 a wolf down there that the sportsman club pays for expense reimbursement. It's not a bounty, it's expense reimbursement.
Yes.
So you take that word bounty out of the equation and it becomes much more palatable.
They just opened that's the Federation for Wildlife Protection or something like that, foundation, I think it's called. I have talked with the Robert, who's the president of it. They just opened a chapter in Montana, and of course around Missoula and Billings and that's not going over real well with all the imports. But they have a problem with, and they do have a trapping system, trapping season and that for wolves in Montana, and they've been very effective with it. And they just don't want to do anything that they're going to encourage more people. The fact that you folks can come from all over the United States and go trapping there if they've taken a course in that kind of stuff can, they're worried about the pressure that might create. The Wisconsin wolf season this year was something else. Did you follow that at all?
I did not.
Well, it was, I think they wanted to kill like 100 wolves. They ended up killing twice that. The season was supposed to be, I may be wrong about this, season was supposed to be 2 weeks long, but they shut it down after 4 days. And get this, do you know the most effective way that they killed wolves? They ran them with dogs. Like those are way different wolf than the ones around here, because the last oh well, we have cougar hunters, right? We have cougar outfitters and that in Alberta. Alberta's one of those places that has really, really big cougar. They hate wolves because they get their dogs get killed by wolves.
Well, yeah, the wolves start baying. It's just a dinner bell.
Yeah,
dinner bell for the wolves. I mean, it's just okay. There's a hound dog. We'll go eat that one.
Exactly. Exactly. So when these guys in Wisconsin were actually killing them by running them with packs, I was like, that's crazy. That's got to be a different kind of wolf altogether.
Yeah. I know I have some friends down still in the lower 48 there that's a real problem for them. They can't turn a hound loose. It just scares the hell out of them because they got a really good chance of losing their hounds.
Yeah, I've friends in Wisconsin and Minnesota, and that like they say it's just totally destroying like coon hounds at night and that kind of stuff, right? The fact that the problem they have with wolves.